And if you are practicing it and you can help push the movement forward, I think it's fine to talk about. But I unfortunately see a lot of companies that preach all of the trendy things, but don't really practice it in reality. And that probably could be a whole separate conversation.
Welcome to 33 Tangents, a roundtable discussion covering a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Your hosts, Jason Thompson, John Naran, Jen Coons, and myself, Jim Driscoll, all live in different areas of the world but work together in the same company. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others.
That's the whole point of it, to entice conversation.
Yeah, I guess.
I think I missed that one.
You missed that one?
I never
Yeah, I
post.
think I did. I have to go back and look.
I never post the boring things that I eat, the things that look so familiar. It's all the.
Yes, all the wild looking stuff.
Jason, is it cold where you're at?
No,
Oh, okay. I just thought maybe with the hat on.
it's
might be a little-
64 degrees. No,
Okay.
I mean,
There you go.
if you want to know why I have the hat on, it's
Oh.
because we were podcasting and I haven't had a chance to do myself up all nice and pretty. So therefore, you get the hat.
Okay. It's actually warmer where you're at than where it is where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I went to the gym this morning and it was like 50 degrees outside.
Well, you'll catch up quickly.
Well, I think they're talking a high of 58 today.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, it's like unseasonably cold right now.
Yeah, we're supposed to be in the high 70s for the next 3 or 4 days, and then we drop down into the low 50s, and then down into the 40s for highs, which is a good thing. I'm learning, I'm being more attuned to weather patterns, in that, we dealt with fires at the end of last year, and now we're really concerned about flooding. And this year, I'm hearing is an ideal spring of what it's supposed to be like in Utah, where you have these peaks and valleys of, you have temperatures start to gradually warm up and get into the high 70s, and then they'll back off for a few days and drop as low as highs in the 40s, and then go back up, and you have this kind of roller coaster, and what it does is it slowly brings down the snowpack over a longer period of time, so you don't have it all running off all at once.
Gotcha. Especially after, with the fires.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a major concern. Is lots of runoff, and we've had, I think most places are at least 150% of normal snowpack. Some places as high as 2,000% of snowpack. It was a crazy winter.
Wow.
So that's my story. But anyway, I've been following more weather patterns, which I'm sure this would have looked normal in the past and I just never would have noticed it, but now I'm like, okay, I see what's going on here, and I guess this is a good thing. Is it 147 degrees in Bangkok?
I was gonna say, it's cooler today because it was raining a little bit earlier, but it's 91, so still warmer than you guys. But
And
it actually
70
feels relatively. It
70%
felt very
humidity?
nice.
No?
No, it was I don't know. It actually wasn't that humid after it stopped raining. It was very comfortable 91.
Fair enough.
Well, comfortable when it's been 115 every day.
Yeah. Wait, that's not a Kit Kat.
No, that's another. I just have a bunch of candies.
We need to remember to bring a whole basket full of snacks to the podcast studio when we record. Now I'm
we do. Right now I've just got my cup of coffee, my third one for the day.
Yeah, I've got my coffee, and I'm not much of a soda drinker, but I'm a sucker, maybe like John, for all the flavors. So these tall, skinny Diet Cokes, there's 8 different flavors. This one's zesty blood orange.
I didn't know
So
they had
Yeah,
that.
I've seen those.
yeah, there's like blood orange, there's ginger lime, there's mango. There's a bunch of different ones. So I'm a sucker and I'm trying them out, even though I don't drink a lot of soda.
Um,
Now you do.
so,
Yeah, well, for
so,
now.
so you guys know I'm gluten free, right?
Yeah,
I've got a
yeah,
gluten
Hmm.
allergy.
yeah.
So I learned something a couple weeks ago that soda is not necessarily gluten free. You think of like gluten containing foods as like the breads and
Oh, there's
things like
gluten in
that.
everything. Well,
Um, there's some kind of like malt they use for
yeah, I can see that.
the caramel coloring,
Yeah, yeah.
especially like in your colas. And I'm like, okay then, because I mean, I cut out soda years ago, but every now and then would have an occasional one, and just thought it was just the crap that's in soda that was making me feel tired. I'm like, okay, well, it's it's the gluten in addition to the other crap within the
That
soda.
sucks. I
So now
mean,
it's like I definitely avoid it.
Wow.
there's like apparently there's so many things like I mean, can you have like a malt?
Like
You could probably have a shake with no malt powder
correct,
in it, right?
correct, but like malt vinegar, I can't have.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh, Jim.
uh, right, your standard Rice Krispie treats, I can't have those because they
I
use a
just
barley
can't.
malt to coat them. So you have to specifically get the gluten free ones.
Wow. Well, I'm
Hmm.
sorry.
And I mean, like for the most part, I don't miss most of it because my head is so much clearer when I don't eat that stuff. It's like I don't want to go back to feeling that way.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what keeps me going. But every now and then, I'm like, I miss a really good piece of pizza or I miss a really good cheesesteak. But overall, it's good.
Fair enough. So we've gotten quite a bit of feedback that well, we had our 1 year show,
Mm-hmm.
and did a little post up on some of our most popular topics that we've discussed over the last year,
Mm-hmm.
and got a little bit of conversation going on social as well, and some of our top episodes actually aren't even analytics related. And maybe that makes sense. You know, a wider audience has a different taste. But we got a lot of feedback that people wanted us to talk more about culture, company culture, how we do things, how we look at things differently. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so what do you have on tap for today?
So I want to use me as a bit of a guinea pig today. Um, I want to talk about, and again, I know at this point, um, the term work life balance has become cliche, but let's start with that. So, I feel like the concept of work life balance started out like all things do as something well intentioned, making sure that people weren't working their lives away. But I feel in recent years, it's become excessively cliche. It's cliche to talk about work life balance. And really, I've seen it used as a major recruiting tactic, used by companies. We offer a work life balance, but they don't define what it is. And let's be honest, work life balance means something for everybody, especially for people like us who enjoy what we do. I mean, sometimes it's easy for me to work late because I enjoy what I'm doing. I'm actually having fun with it. Um, so I want to talk a bit about like work-life balance. What does that mean? We could talk about it from the employee perspective, the employer perspective, but let's also use me as a bit of an example, about how to maintain balance in your life when major life event hits you. We talked in recent weeks about how, my wife and I had our first child, and it's a bit of an adjustment. And I've mentioned multiple times, I know I'm not the first to go through this, and I'm not going to be the last either. So I think having this conversation could be helpful too. Um, Now, for me, like we started our family later in life, toward the end of our 30s, which is not out of the norm, but it's also not the norm. Most people, start their families much younger. So for both of us, we've both been able to set a pattern, for the way we ran our lives. And me, when it came to work, I have also made no bones about it that I'm a bit of a workaholic. And for me, time was never a factor. I had all the time I needed. whether that meant working late and getting stuff done. To get stuff done, I had all the time I needed. Well, that's changed drastically in the last 5 weeks. I no longer have unlimited amounts of time to get things done. I need to adjust, and it's been a bit of an adjustment. So I mean, I just threw a lot out there. One particular example which we can dig into, but yeah, let's start off with just work-life balance at a high level. What does that mean to everybody?
Oh man. Yeah, and I think that's a lot to unpack, and there's a couple things that I wanted to touch on. Maybe I'll let John jump in first, but I wanted to touch on one of the things you brought up around a recruiting tool. For me, it's more important to practice these things than to talk about it. And if you are practicing it and you can help push the movement forward, I think it's fine to talk about. But I unfortunately see a lot of companies that preach all of the trendy things, but don't really practice it in reality. And that probably could be a whole separate conversation. But I think we were talking about this a few days ago, and there was a tweet from Evan Lapointe. This was back on May 7th, and I like the way he put it. He said, instead of talking about things in a work-life balance scenario, have we considered seeking fulfillment rest balance? And his whole point was that, you go out and you focus on creating value in your life or in the lives of other people, and then when you need to, you then take time to recharge. And once you're fueled up again, you go and create value again. So it's less about creating timelines to say, okay, I'm going to work during this period, then I'm going to take time off and do something else. It's more of, I'm going to understand what I can do and what my fuel tank looks like, and I'm going to go out and create value, whatever that looks like. And when I need to recharge, I want to have the flexibility of saying I need to recharge. And it's an interesting way of looking at things, I think.
I really like that framework, but I guess I would say it's really difficult to practice that fulfillment value balance if as a consultant or in a services organization versus doing something entrepreneurial, it seems like.
In that there's why? Like because of
We
time
have it feels
commitments
like
that
we
we've
have
made?
more constraints and time commitments. I might take a slightly different view than you might expect in this conversation. So just claiming that. But
So you're gonna make
I
Jim happy for being antagonistic?
yeah, maybe this time. Um, yeah, no, I think we. I mean, I don't know how to build up to the punchline properly, but I mean, I think the way that we're structured, we have a lot of flexibility within the constraints that we have, but we still have some milestones that are static to some degree, whether they be
Yeah.
status meetings, regular deliverables, and it's usually at a pretty quick pace. So to me, the idea of sprinting and then resting until you're charged up and sprinting again sounds great, but it seems like you need more control over the full range of the full spectrum of your timeline, basically, or your like everything that you're doing. Like it wouldn't be scalable for me to say, I'm just gonna not work on this client for a few weeks until I charge up again.
No, but it may be
Potentially,
scalable to do it at a smaller level, maybe, right?
potentially, yeah.
I mean, if it's a half a day or a day, say, you know what, I'm gonna take this day off. I need to recharge. That's
It's a
more
fair point.
feasible, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. In the smaller time chunks.
Yeah. Well, so getting back to your original point, Jim, for me, it's about autonomy. But to John's point, there are constraints, and I think it's important to talk about that. And that, sure, if we were all independently wealthy and we could do whatever we wanted, then it's a different conversation. We remove those constraints, but we're all dealing with a certain set of constraints based on what it is that we're being paid to do. At 33 Sticks, we have clients that are paying for us to help them mature their use of data and become smarter with how they think about data. And we have constraints because they have constraints, right? They have things that they're trying to accomplish. So we have to live within that. However, as much autonomy as we can have within that, I believe is, in my mind, the work-life balance that we're striving for. And I always compare it, and I think I shared the story on the podcast with a previous job where we were literally forced to be at our desk, not just in the office, but at our desk between certain periods of time. And I, I think I shared the story where someone said, well, what if I have a dentist appointment at 9 in the morning? And the response was, work with your dentist, see if they'll come in earlier, work on the weekends. That's not work-life balance, right? Work-life
I
balance
love that story, by the way.
is being able to...
I still get a kick out of every time I hear it.
It's a great story, and it sets a really good anchor point for the extremes. But to me, it's both at the micro level, so the day-to-day, that I can create my own day. And again, to John's point, there are constraints. We may have meetings that we've committed to attend. We may have client deliverables that we've committed to getting done. But within that day, I should have some sort of control over what my day looks like. So if I want to take the afternoon off, if I want to take an early lunch, if I want to whatever, I should be able to design that. And then at the more macro level, having the ability to schedule my time a little bit more freely. One of the things that I think is great about our setup is that we do have that ability. And I've seen you, Jim, personally take advantage of that, where you've worked directly with the clients that are under your care, and you've built a timeline that in a couple months, I'm going to Disneyland for 10 days. And we should have that autonomy and flexibility to build that into our schedules. So again, being fair to John's point that we have constraints, we still should have flexibility to work around that to the best of our ability and not have that dictated to us. So that was a lot.
No, it's a lot. And that's the first I've heard Evan's take on it, and we had a chat with him last week, and he always has those pearls of wisdom. So I really like that one, and I do see John's point too. Like we can't necessarily be in, say, 100% control of the schedule, but I still like Evan's perspective, and it's a bit of making it your own, where you're not tied to email. You're not tied to responding to an email. Like, one very specific example is I've worked with clients to set the expectation that, I don't run my day via email. So if there's something you send via email, it may take a day or two for me to get back to you, but I will get back to you. Now, that being said, if there's like a walls burning down kind of emergency, here's the bat phone. Here's the way to get a hold of me that I know that it's an emergency. And it's something where we need to stop what we're doing. And that gives me the ability to kind of plan out, like, these are the key things I need to get done this week. But then there's a little bit of buffer time for those things that just come out and are out of your control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, I think it's about setting those proper expectations with everyone you work with, not only internally but externally. I think it's important to have that conversation. And ultimately, again, the idea is that we want to have a bit more control over how we design things. And it's an interesting conversation because historically, I believe we've looked at we have a work life and we have a personal life, and they're two separate things. We put on a costume and we go to work and we're one person, then we take that off and we go home and we're a different person. But with the landscape the way things are, that those two different roles have really melded together. It's hard to separate, especially in our setup where we're 100% remote and distributed. It's really, really challenging to pull those two roles apart. And so rather than trying to bucket those into distinct things, look at it as, this is my life, and I'm going to create balance within my life of different things that I do, and contrast that to organizations that are mandating where you have more of a view as your employment is your life. And I believe I posted some stuff about the Alibaba CEO and I can't remember the crazy work schedule that they have in Asia, where it's like, I'm gonna have to look it up, but they're working.
It's like a 12-hour workday.
Yeah, for like 6 days a week, like 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, something insane. But also I'm seeing it in the Bay Area. Salaries for engineers have skyrocketed in the Bay Area. and they're offering all these perks, and then in the fine print it basically says, "But you live here, you know, and by the way, we're building dorms here, so you can stay here all the time, you know." So we're seeing even a shift to that in Silicon Valley and other areas where there's less and less balance. Yeah, you might have a lot of great perks. You know, I may have on-site restaurants and I can get my clothes washed and a gym, but I never leave work.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess that's okay. We never leave work either, as long as you create that balance and that's where you want your life centered. But it's important to have that conversation of what that blending of work and life means for a unified, this is just my life, and I need to have things in balance.
Hmm.
This might be a common quote, but it's one that I always refer to, and you might have heard it, but it's um, that the goal is to work to live, not live to work. And that's kind of how I define the work-life balance a little bit.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure who originally said that off the top of my head, but I'm sure Google will help with that.
yeah, no, that's a good one. And I have, I'm sure you all know at this point, I'm a huge fan of Patagonia, and the culture that they've developed, and you know they take a very similar view of things. In fact, Hilas shared a video with me the other day where it was highlighting their on-site daycare, and their setup is amazing. It looks like they're at this lodge in the mountains, and they have kids running around and building things and climbing on rock walls, and they're like, this is our life, and it's just all in balance, and it's amazing, and we're doing this to provide opportunities for us and them. And I love that it's, you know, we're not spending all of our time just to work. That we're trying to create experiences, and from that we're trying to do good things. um, I'm interested I'm interested in your take, John, because I think you've had a lot of polar opposites, and we bring this up in several of the episodes where you were kind of deep in the Silicon Valley lifestyle, maybe not lifestyle, but that kind of world, and you went to a far extreme of being completely untethered, and for a little while truly did the digital nomad thing, bouncing around. I'm interested in what you've seen through your experience of the pros and cons, because I can't believe that having all this autonomy and work life balance is the way we look at it has 100% pros. I'm sure there's some downsides, but what have you seen, like comparing and contrasting the two completely different worlds?
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, and it's definitely very true. For years, more than a decade, worked in Silicon Valley, a variety of places, a variety of different environments, different size companies, and it progressively. I don't think by nature of the company is I was at, but just more the how time evolved and the entire area and tech matured and got more competitive, that it just became more and more demanding, until it got to a breaking point for me where I kind of, yeah, shut it out. I took time off from work, and that's kind of when we started talking about me joining 33 Sticks. And I remember saying that I wanted to do something very different. I was actually even considering not like just leaving tech completely. I was that burned out at the time. But we found this kind of interesting idea medium to, like you said, take the exact opposite and travel 100% of the time, basically. Looking back, I did that for about a year, which got well, it was I think very necessary for me at the time to take a step back. I think because I felt like I had no freedom before to really experience. I hate to use the word life because I think life happens anywhere, but just to kind of be more adventurous, I guess, around the world, which was to me something that I always wanted to do. So I never had the freedom to do that before. The this great autonomy allowed that to happen. But I guess the biggest downside is that there's really no structure. And I think for me, compared to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think I had the least experience of us working in a very autonomous way, like completely autonomous. So for me, it was a struggle to find structure where none existed. Um,
Yeah, I can see that.
yeah.
Yeah, and so let's go back to how you open this, Jim, because I think this is a really great contrast between you and John. So, John had this ultimate kind of freedom, and he had this palette to basically design in a deliberate way this balance. Let's contrast that with you. So you're saying, my new life scenario is that this balance is being forced upon me, right? So you're kind of coming at it from the angle of now I have these different forces in play here that are kind of making me think about that balance. Is the thought process different?
Absolutely. And it's been an adjustment. And I'll be honest with you, like in the months leading up to the baby arriving, I panicked a couple times because, like I said, I always relied on my very lax schedule, and not lax schedule in the, well, I'm just screwing around, so I have to work late tonight. It's the fact that, oh, I've got nothing going on tonight. I can throw another 3 hours at something and to get it done, so I can say it's done. Or, yep, there's a fire burning, and I can keep going. When the baby came, I mean, several thoughts went through my head, and again, I'm using a very specific example here. Um, the one is like, I got one shot at this. Like, there's no reset button. And that's one thing, that thought that goes through your mind is like, I've got one shot at this. I don't want to screw it up. But then the thing is too is like, yeah, I have to shut down by a certain point, because now I've got responsibilities that are just as important, and sometimes maybe just more important than work, and that I need to go take care of at either before I do work. Or, and again, I'm kind of just all over the place today. um uh I'm the type of person who does thrive on a bit of structure. While we don't have, say, a firm start time, a firm end time, just having like a bit of a time box to say this is when I get stuff done. That's what helps me get stuff done. That's what helps me be successful. So that being said, yeah, with this major change, it's like I need to change the way I do things. I need to become much more vigilant on what I'm working on. I need to be much more vigilant with the prioritization of what I do to make sure I'm doing the most important, things, the most critical things. Because if you think about it, it's easy to fall into the mindset of just movement for the sake of movement,
Sure.
checking items off a list to check items off a list. Where before, say, I can get two things that come out of a conversation with a client, get them both done in a day. That's not necessarily possible anymore. And I'm talking very hypothetically. It's now more of, okay, of these two things that we talked about, what's most important? And actually that came up the other day with a client. They're piloting some new functionality on the site, and we've got some very critical items in the queue that are in process right now. So we're like, okay, with this pilot, like, what are we talking about here? Like, how critical is this compared to those other items? And when we started to lay things out on the table, they're like, yeah, actually, it's not. Let's just put it on the back burner for right now. Chances are we may not even go forward with it. It's something like that, like having those conversations and pushing for those conversations to make sure that my time is spent, wisely. So, I mean, does that answer your question?
It does. And I want to take this in a couple different ways, but before I do, I want to mention that while we're trying to figure this out and we're constantly thinking through how do we have the right balance of things, and sometimes we go to the extreme, and I think we've all probably said it to each other. It's like, oh, I'm burned out. I've kind of stretched a little too far. I think we're doing really important work in this area, and I think it's critically important that we talk about it. And while you guys may not see the fruits of what we do, I get the chance to see that every once in a while. And I'm always talking about the fact that we just happen to be really good in the analytics space and helping companies use data and optimize their digital presence. But we feel our mission is something far greater than that. And as I'm talking with prospective employees, I'm like, look, I'm assuming that you're really, really good at analytics. But what's more important to us is that we're here to change people's lives for the better and create amazing experiences for people. And this is our vehicle to do that. And, I hear from people maybe once a week where I'm getting feedback on the things we're talking about, the things that we do to challenge the norm of how consulting is done, the things that we do to challenge the norm of how business is done. And, every once in a while I hear from someone saying, it's really inspiring. I really look up to what you guys are building. And I don't say this to toot our own horn. I say this to like help understand that it's important that we're having these conversations and that we're struggling through some of these things that are difficult, because it is making an impact on people's lives, and they're really taking a lot of vision from what we're doing and saying there is a better way. And I should take a picture of it, but I every time I get one of these communications, I print it out and I put it on the wall behind my computer so I can look at it as a reminder of, really why we're doing these things, because it is touching people's lives and is having a really good impact on the world, even at a small scale. And for me, that's what is exciting and motivates us, or motivates me to do what we do. So I would love to take a few minutes in this conversation. Again, we're kind of looking at this from multiple different backgrounds and angles. But what advice would we have to our listener? Maybe not everyone's at a 33 Sticks where we have this great sense of autonomy. Maybe everyone listening isn't their own boss or entrepreneur, but that shouldn't take away hope that they can be deliberate in how they design their day and how they push for more autonomy and freedom in their roles. And I continually go back to Todd at the Monitor. And I don't know if he would agree with me or not, but I believe that he took a lot of our energy and what we're doing to help push for his situation where he moved his family to Hawaii for a year. I'm like, that's amazing. Working for a very old established company, he was able to make that happen. So from our experiences, what would we say to the person that works at the 50,000 person company that may say, this is great, guys, but you work for a tiny little company where you're all distributed. It's not going to work for me.
The one thing I think of, and it's just as I was starting to write up notes for this episode, I kept coming back to, I feel like at this point, the term work-life balance has been hijacked by those 50,000 people companies and the recruiters within them as a selling point. But yet it's vaguely defined. So for the person who say, let's focus on someone who's just looking for a new position somewhere, and you see the idea of work-life balance, we support work-life balance. My advice is ask the hard questions on exactly how do they define work-life balance. Is their definition of work-life balance aligned with yours? Because work-life balance to them could mean, hey, we've got ping pong tables and we've got a kegerator and we've got that kind of stuff, but you're still tethered to a desk from 8:30 in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. That may not align with work-life balance as you need it, which may be, I need to work from home 3 days a week because of my wife's work schedule, and I've got to pick up the kids from school. So that's work-life balance for me. I'll still get stuff done. I just can't come into an office. Like that's the first thing I think of is really push for the company either you work for, or if you're looking for a new job, what is their definition of work-life balance? Because odds are, I think right now you would probably find it's not aligned with your definition of it.
I really like that. That's a very important point, I think, because there are a lot of different definitions of work-life balance. Like you said, all those perks in the office are totally satisfactory to many people, but not practical for someone that wants to, leave early to pick up their kids from school or whatever. So yeah, I think that's very important. I was also kind of thinking of another tactic, I think, in terms of pushing towards autonomy, no matter what kind of company you're at, is just being a little bit more intentional with your time management. And I think probably practically that means something I did before too, was kind of just with meetings. And I still do that now, as you guys know. It's like, just don't accept every meeting right away. And maybe, and there's different ways to go about that. Maybe block off personal time. I mean, time to do, heads down work, time to do whatever else. But I think just creating those gaps in your schedule and not being pulled meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and being double booked and triple booked, which so many people are. I mean, so many people I think go through their days in the office, and it's 5:30, and they're like, I didn't do anything today except sit in meetings. I think that does have a huge impact. Obviously, some meetings are critical, but not all of them are. Sometimes people tend to add, everyone they think might be, relevant into a meeting when not everyone needs to be there. Some meetings can be accomplished through emails, whatever. So I think tactically, it's asking whoever's scheduling the meeting, making sure there's a defined purpose, that you have a defined reason to be there, and maybe pushing for them to happen in certain blocks of time. I did that a lot, both prior to 33.6 and now too, in just terms of managing schedules better, is just trying to block off certain amounts of time, because it's just the time just flies when you're in a
Yeah.
meeting,
I,
and a
I,
very, very important time.
I have a crazy idea that what if the purpose of the meeting for a lot of these meetings is to fill time,
Yeah, that's
right? Because I
I,
think
I
Movement for the
tend to
sake of
think that
movement.
sometimes too.
yeah, I think we've been trained to fill an 8 hour workday. If we look at the professional business world, we've been trained to fill an 8 hour workday. And if the conversation is less about what we're accomplishing and the value we're creating and what we're doing, and more about I worked 8 hours, then a lot of times we come up with these things, and meeting is a great time filler to fill that time. And I like John's word where he's talking about intentionality, being intentional in how you work. That to me is a very important part of the work life balance conversation, because again, it shouldn't be about filling 8 hours a day. It should be, what are we trying to accomplish? And can I accomplish that by working 2 hours this day and 7 hours the next day? And then that's what we should be doing. We should be intentional in how we're using that time to get to a certain point, to solve a certain problem, to create a certain set of value.
Definitely caveats to this line I'm going to say, but I think generally meetings have the same impact on your productivity than TV or social media would, in many ways, most of the time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think they can be highly valuable if they're focused and we're trying to solve a problem, and we're communicating clearly. But again, just look how most meetings are scheduled. We schedule them 30 minutes, an hour, like a very specific. I'm like, why are we doing that? It's just a custom that we've been trained that this is how things work, and we're filling these blocks of time. And again, I really, really, really like your use of the word intentional, in that really, I think, is the key to unlocking a lot of this quote work life balance, is being intentional, in what it is that we're doing.
Talking about those time blocks, I love when there's a meeting scheduled for an hour and maybe it ends 5 minutes early, and then everyone celebrates the fact, oh, you have your time back, but no one ever apologizes for stealing it from you in the first place.
It's so true. It's so true.
But John, shortly after you joined and you started employing that, like I took it was after one of our conversations. I mean, I took a lot of what you do to heart as well, to the point where like I really only try to schedule meetings on like 2.5 days a week, and reserve the rest of the time for actually getting stuff done and being able to concentrate. Because one of the things with what we do is we can't necessarily always do what we do in half-hour blocks. It takes us time to get into like that really focused state. And I know for me, it takes sometimes 45 minutes to really get into something. And then it's like, okay,
Mhm.
I don't want to stop. And if meetings were spread throughout the week, I'm not getting anything done. So yeah, one of the things I did was I took to heart what you do is grouping meetings together. I have a majority of my client meetings on Monday. It sets the tone for the week, and it also that's where we kind of set our plan for the week. Tuesdays are fairly free. Thursday afternoons are free, and Fridays, like I don't schedule any meetings Friday. Like that's my time to wrap up the week. That's my time to work on other things that have just been kind of like on the back burner that I want to get done. So I'm kind of rambling at the moment now, but like I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and then there's definitely like there's a cost to context switching too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's important. There's a lot of strategies I feel like blocking time off and maybe grouping types of clients together or whatnot. A lot of different ways to experiment with it as well.
As long as you're intentional. Again, I think I
Yeah.
mean, that's the
Mm-hmm.
key word of this conversation is that oftentimes we just let work come at us, and it's really hard to have a proper balance if we're just reacting. And when you do that, you tend to be in kind of the emergency mode where you're just reacting to everything that's happening, and it's really difficult to have balance in those type of scenarios. But for the most part, we don't work in an emergency room. And I don't think a lot of people in businesses work in an emergency room. And there are times where you have to be in that mindset, but I think it was Evan again that had talked about this, the difference between being an ER doctor and being a doctor in the operating room. And like you take a very different mentality at it. And for the most part in business, we're in the operating room. It's very well designed and intentional and scheduled, and very rarely should we have to react and be in an emergency situation. But I think the default, and I think it's just a human default, is that we're reactors to things. We're in that emergency scenario where we're just reacting to things that happen. And we have to force ourselves to be deliberate, to be intentional for how we're designing our day. Because again, for us in the business world, most of us should be OR doctors. We should be very deliberate in designing what it is that we're doing and have those things done. And I just don't think most of us take advantage of that, whether it's the environment that we work in or just, again, we've been conditioned to do the opposite. But that would be my number one takeaway and recommendation for people is that you should have the power to be more deliberate in designing your day. And I often hear from people where they say things like, I love what you guys are doing. I want to be a part of something like that. I'm like, well, have you asked? Have you asked your boss, can I do X, Y, and Z, or just started doing it and see what happens? And the answer is usually no. That's not how it works. But what's the harm in at least asking? At least trying to put some of these things in play. And ultimately, someone can't tell you to not be deliberate, not be intentional. And if they are, then you're probably at the wrong employer anyway. And so, just taking a little bit of your time and taking that visual into appreciation that I can be the designer of my day. And sure, things are going to happen, but it's up to me and how I react to that. And I don't have to react to everything as an emergency.
Absolutely.
Jim, you're perplexed.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of we're again just another mic drop moment. It's just okay, we're done.
But it came too early. We have like 5 more minutes left to record.
Yeah.
But to John's point, why are we keeping meetings going for an hour?
Exactly.
Well, we're just filling time now.
Yeah.
You're wasting my time.
But no, it's funny you bring that up. I had a client at one point where their default was they would schedule a meeting for an hour, whether we needed an hour or not. We get on there and we'd solve things in like 20 minutes, and like we'd have an agenda going in. This is what we're looking to talk about, and then we'd take care of it. And then you turn around and say, okay, what else do you want to talk about? I'm like, well, how we're done 40 minutes early, and we can go do other stuff now. And that drove me nuts. Like, no, let's not schedule a meeting for an hour by default.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think we covered a lot of really useful stuff, and maybe that is a good place to wrap it up. And I would just say, I would challenge anybody listening today that having balance is critically important. And it's something that you absolutely should be working towards. It's something that we work towards all the time. And while I think, there's an outside perspective of what work and life is like at 33 Sticks, it's never perfect. We're constantly trying to do better and make sure we have that proper balance of things. But I would recommend that everyone take 2 or 3 things in their work life that they can be more intentional about. And make a list and start a plan of how can I be more intentional about some of these things. And really, I think the items are less important than setting down the path of I'm going to change my mindset from being reactionary to being more intentional in how I approach my day. And I think that goes a long way. Sure, it helps to have an environment where having that proper balance is something that is supported and is talked about. But even if you don't have that, I think you can, as an individual, have a tremendous impact on your day by, again, I think John's word is the golden word for this episode, is just being intentional about how you address your day.
Agreed. So I think that's the spot to wrap up for today. So we won't fill any more time then. So with that, John, unless you have anything else to add, well, let's go ahead and wrap up for now.
No, let's do it.
Cool. All right, guys. We'll catch you later then.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach us, you could do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at www.33sticks.com. The 33 Tangents podcast is a production of 33 Sticks.